Hi, this is Knit Locally. Today we're going to talk about buttonholes. We're going to talk about the bound off buttonhole, and then we're also going to talk about the yarn over method to create a buttonhole. Okay, so typically you're going to have your buttonhole in the middle, not the middle, but in the first several stitches of your row. And what you're going to do is you're going to want to knit the first couple stitches. It will tell you based on the pattern how many to knit. I'm going to give myself 3 here. And then there are 2 different methods I like to use. I either like to use the bound off method, where you bind off on this row and then you cast on your next row, or we're going to do a yarn over, where you yarn over on this row, which creates a hole, and then we knit into it on the next row. So let's do the bound off method first. So what we're going to do is let's bind off. Your pattern will tell you, but for our purposes, let's bind off 2 stitches. So we're going to knit 1, knit 2, we're going to pull this first stitch over our second stitch, creating a bind off. We're going to knit that second stitch again. We're going to pull it over. And that creates a bound off space, okay? Then we're just gonna keep knitting. Now, presumably you're not gonna have 2 buttonholes right next to each other, but we're gonna create another one just for fun. So this one, we're going to use a yarn over method. So what we would do is we're going to knit. You can either do this before or after your yarn over. You're going to have to decrease that yarn over you're going to make, which is that increase stitch. And your pattern will tell you whether you yarn over first or knit 2 together first and then yarn over, or if you were to yarn over and then knit 2 together. So in this case, we knit 2 together and we yarned over, and then we're going to create that stitch. So let's finish this row quickly. And then really the magic happens on the next row. So what we're going to do, this is a purl row. So we're going to purl here. And you can do this English or continental knitting English style, so the camera's easier for my hands to see. So this is the first, that's that first or the last purl stitch before our yarn over. You can see our yarn over is here. So what you want to do is this space here, we want to purl into this space so it opens up that hole and really accentuates that hole. If I was to purl here, it would twist that stitch and then cinch up that hole, and you'd have a very small buttonhole. So let's purl into this hole, and you can see it's created a nice buttonhole there. Right, so you can see that's created a nice large buttonhole. Now we'll get back to our bound off method. Now we bound off 2 stitches, so we're going to have to add back those 2 stitches. So what you want to do is use what I like to call the E cast on. So you just grab your finger, wrap it around like an E, loop it on. You grab your finger, wrap it around, loop it on. That's the E cast on. And then you just keep purling. And this creates a hole. So hold on and let's see. And this creates that nice hole right there. So let's finish this row. And then if we quickly knit the next row, you'll be able to see how it all, so these are my E cast on stitches. We're going to just knit into them, right? That will cinch up and it creates that nice buttonhole. Now, let's talk about what happens. Let's give myself some more yarn here. Okay. So let's look at our buttonholes for a second. Okay, now the row is done. Let's look at our 2 buttonholes. So we have our 2 buttonholes here, and you can see they each look a little bit different, right? This one kind of has a slope to it, and this one has an opposite slope to it. So I guess it would depend on what you were looking for in your pattern. Your pattern will probably tell you which method to use, but I find them fairly interchangeable. You can see they sort of create about the same size hole. They can stretch. Now, what happens if you've created a buttonhole and you decide that they are too big? So what you can do is, after you have bound off all your stitches and everything is, you're going to sew in your ends. What I do is I take an end, or take a scrap piece of yarn. I'm just going to use this end for demonstration purposes, and you can go in and sew up a portion of that hole. So you can sew up from the back side a portion and make it tighter by weaving in that end. So sometimes I don't necessarily worry about, and see that hole has actually gotten a little bit smaller. So you can see how that hole is smaller than what it used to be. And you can continue to sew it up all the way around and cinch it as much as you need. So I don't tend to worry about if my buttonholes are too big. I think the challenge becomes if they end up too small. You can't make them bigger. But you can actually make them smaller if they end up too big for the buttons you've chosen for your pattern. I hope that helps. If you have any questions, please comment. Thank you.